This is a video that I intended to make back when this movie was still in theaters. The DCEU had already fumbled so many times that it was effectively in ruins, and I had the expectation that I was going to have to defend this movie if it turned out to be good. Even if it hadn't turned out to be a good movie, I intended to defend it anyway. I intended to give it a fair shake and to go a little easy on it the same kind of way that I did with Batman vs. Superman. Because I don't want to see the stories of these characters stop coming to the big screen, I just want to see it done better. And at this point, giving filmmakers more opportunities to bring these characters to the big screen gives them more opportunities to do it better. But then literally everybody and their mom was going online talking about how great this movie was, and they were entirely accurate. I didn't really feel like I could have much to add, so I put it off, and I put it off, and eventually it became irrelevant. Now, with the recent drop of the Blu-ray and the DVD versions of the movie, I feel interest in it is probably renewed enough that somebody out there will be able to get something out of this review. If you are someone who hasn't seen the Wonder Woman movie yet, and you are on the fence as to whether or not you should buy the DVD or the Blu-ray version, do it. Spoiler alert for the rest of this review video. Just do it. It's a good movie. For those of you who want a little bit more of an in-depth breakdown, though, let's talk about a couple of the things that this movie does really well, and a couple of the things that it doesn't do quite so well as I would have liked it to. My biggest issue with this movie is the ends. And by that I mean the bookends of the movie. Because Batman vs. Superman exists, and because Wonder Woman was introduced to us as a character in that movie, this version of her at least, I suppose someone at the studio thought it was necessary for this movie to be bookended by scenes that reminded us of that. Unfortunately. Yes, I think Batman vs. Superman did some things that were worthwhile, but that doesn't mean I want to be reminded of its existence when I'm not prepared for it. In principle, this is fine. It doesn't hurt the movie at all. It pads it out a little bit, but it doesn't hurt it at all. It doesn't detract from anything that's in the runtime of the actual movie, at the very least. But it does remind us of something that ends up being kind of confusing by the end, which I'll touch on in a couple of minutes. This version of Wonder Woman is set during World War I, which is not how it's always handled when talking about her origin story as a superhero, but it's not a bad way to go about it. Diana, the princess of Themyscira, was born of the magic of Zeus to her mother, Hippolyta, on Paradise Island, home of the Greek Amazons, or at least a version of them adapted for DC Comics. The Amazons are a society of effectively immortal warrior women who have spent their entire lives training their bodies and minds to be impeccable machines. They are smart, cunning, and extraordinarily effective in battle. But for thousands of years, they have had no interaction with the world around them, their island protected from view by the last magic of Zeus before he and the majority of the rest of the Olympian gods were killed off thousands of years ago. But when an American spy in the employ of the British Army accidentally brings a portion of the conflict to their island, Diana jumps to the conclusion that it must be the final Olympian, Ares, who is causing this great war, and that it is her duty to stop it. She accompanies this man, Steve Trevor, played by Chris Pine, to Man's World in an attempt to find Ares and stop him. And while it is a bit of a minor spoiler, I will tell you that while Ares is involved in the conflict, he's not involved in the way that she thinks he is. She thinks that he's magically causing World War I to happen, making the assumption that mankind as a whole wouldn't do this to themselves, and she's obviously quite wrong. Which is one of my favorite things about this version of the character. Wonder Woman has always been a very intelligent character, witty and quick to pick up on things that she didn't understand at the beginning of the day. But there's also a certain naivete to her, especially in portrayals of her early superheroine career like this one. She has lived literally apart from the rest of the world, so of course the concepts that are common and well known to the rest of the world will be harder for her to grasp, at least initially. She has a very black and white worldview, and is very slow to come to understand the much more gray worldview that most people take entirely for granted. And yet when things do start to occur to her, she doesn't let it disillusion her. She holds on to her kindness and her goodness and rededicates herself to doing good with it. She's a warrior and she'll straight up kill people, but her preference would be a peaceful solution. This movie doesn't have nearly as much action as it could have. There's a lot of build up to the first real action sequence, not counting a couple of sequences on Paradise Island. But you don't mind it because getting to see Diana interact with the real world and with these characters from the real world is such a treat that it manages to be engaging and compelling when you wouldn't expect it to necessarily be the case. There are quite a few similarities between this and Captain America, the First Avenger. They're both period pieces, they're both war stories. Diana has a sword and a shield, but she still has a shield, and in this version it's a round shield, much like Captain America's round shield. And she does a couple of times use it in a similar way, but it never really felt like this movie was ripping that movie off. First of all, when Wonder Woman puts together her band of comrades the same way that Captain America did in the First Avenger, whereas Cap's band of comrades didn't really feel like they made much of an impact on the movie, Hers definitely do. They're all their own characters. They all get a little bit of an arc. They're all independently compelling, and the way that she interacts with them and shows that she cares about them is really refreshing to see in a superhero movie these days. They don't show their rapport by poking fun at each other or quipping back and forth. They show it by being genuinely appreciative of each other. I'm obviously alluding to the kind of humor you'll see in one of the Marvel movies, and I like those movies. Don't get me wrong, I like the humor in them. Quite a lot, actually, but this was a refreshing change of pace. The directing was good. Gal Gadot plays Wonder Woman in this movie, and I'm just going to come out and say it. With the wrong director, she's not a great actress. She was in some of the Fast and Furious movies, and I looked into them to try to form an opinion on her in this role before I went and saw this movie. And for a while, I had convinced myself that she wasn't going to do a good job, because she's not great in those movies. But now I'm convinced that it must have just been an issue of her not working with the right director, because combined with director Patty Jenkins, who worked on Wonder Woman, I wouldn't say that she's like Academy Award worthy or anything, but she definitely does an above average job. There's one scene in particular where she and Steve are making an appeal to some generals to go through with their plan to end this threat once and for all. To Diana, that means the threat of Ares, and to Steve, it means the threat of this horrible poison that the enemy is developing. And they refuse, and Steve seems to go along with what they said. And of course, Diana protests because they're coming off as cowards, and her leaders would never be cowards. But Steve takes her aside, and he reveals that he's lied to them, that they're going to go on the mission anyway. And she takes you through this face journey where she realizes exactly what he's done, and how out of the question that would be for her and her people. And it's just delightful. It's one of my favorite moments of the movie to go back and rewatch. And there's another scene later on where Chris Pine's Steve Trevor is alone in a scene, and he takes us through another face journey that's even better and pretty freaking heartbreaking at the same time. And it is by far the best acting I've ever seen from a man, ever. All of that speaks to not only the talent of the actors, but to the director. But by far the best thing about this movie, and what makes it stand apart from the other DCEU movies, aside from the fact that it's better quality overall, of course, is one scene in particular that I'm sure if you've been following news about this movie at all, you know about in some way, shape, or form. You may have heard it referred to as the trenches scene or the no man's land scene. Steve and Diana are traversing the length of some trenches, some World War I trenches, and Diana sees the state of the people there. She realizes that things are only going to get worse for them unless they can push forward and defeat the enemy, to break through the enemy's line. And despite the fact that she is told that it is physically impossible to cross no man's land, she stands up and she does it anyway, giving the Allied forces the opportunity to follow their lead and make real progress in the fight. She hears the word impossible and she just ignores it, doing what she must do to make the impossible possible. And when you're in a universe where characters such as a man who literally defies death and physics exist, i.e. Superman, that's the kind of thing that these characters do on a daily basis. They overcome the impossible. There's an old adage that Marvel Comics writes people trying to be heroes, whereas DC writes heroes trying to be people, sometimes with the word gods swapped out for heroes. And it is absolutely true, and it is something that Marvel has done a really good job of. Their characters are more flawed, they're more down-to-earth, they're more relatable. DC characters have moments of that, obviously, because they're still characters, they're still people. But they're more akin to symbols for us to rally behind than they are characters for us to relate to, and this movie managed to nail that perfectly with Diana's portrayal, especially in this scene. And I realize I spoiled quite a bit of the contents of the scene, but that doesn't matter, because it's the experience of seeing it that carries with it all the weight. From what I understand, some of her superiors in the studio actually wanted Patty Jenkins to cut that scene, and she had to fight for it, and I'm so thankful that she did. This movie still would have been decent and watchable without it, but that scene makes this movie what it is. That is the scene where Diana, this person we've been getting to know for quite a bit of time up to this point, ceases being just a person and becomes a hero. It's directed perfectly, the music is great, the reactions of the other characters in the scene are priceless. I've watched it several times now, and I genuinely can't think of a way they could have done anything in that scene better than they already have. Though that's far to say that this movie is flawless. It's a petty nitpick, but I don't like that they killed off the entire pantheon of Olympian gods in this movie off-screen. I doubt they were ever going to use them in the DCEU, but they've used them in the comics before, and I like knowing that they could potentially show up in the future movies, so sue me. Now we know that they pretty much can't, which is kind of a bummer. There's also the effects. They were very Zack Snyder-y effects. Style over substance kinds of effects. The digital effects in this looked kind of rubbery, kind of, well, straight up fake, I guess you would say. Whenever it's a computer-generated person, you can tell they're not there, and there are scenes where some computer effects are digitally inserted behind Diana, and you can absolutely tell that that stuff is not actually happening in the same place that she's standing. But it ends up being okay. It's not quite so bad as some of the worst stuff in Batman vs. Superman. You get a bit of a CG villain at the very very end, but it's nowhere near as bad as Doomsday in Batman vs. Superman. It overall works to give the movie this sort of comic booky feel. You never become fully immersed into the action scenes, which I guess is a bit of a problem, but it also gives you the sense that you're reading a comic book, or in this case, watching one. Though a lot of the effects in the final climax of the movie were just not good. They weren't good at all. But then at the same time, a lot of the action scenes in this movie, including the final climax of the movie, managed to get the message of the movie across very effectively. This movie has a very anti-war message, but it's not shoved down your throat. It's handed to you very subtly. I take it back, there's one scene where it's shoved down your throat a little bit, where something just awful happens, and there's nothing Diana can do about it. And it happens to a bunch of people we just met, and it was pretty sucky, and it was a bit heavy-handed, but I still think it worked in context. There's also the twist as to exactly which part Ares is playing in the war, and it's pretty interesting. I'm sure a lot of you guys aren't going to see it coming. The ending's a little cheesy, even for me, and I'm someone who likes a lot of cheese with his entertainment. And the final message of the movie does kind of contradict what we saw in Batman vs. Superman, that implied that Diana gave up being a hero for a long time, that she's only just now starting to do it again. That just doesn't line up with what we saw at the end of her individual story. Still, this is an absolutely fantastic portrayal of one of my favorite comic book characters. Someone who I consider to be a genuine inspiration for myself. But then again, I haven't been a fan of the character for all that long compared to some people, and I haven't even read a whole lot of her comic books, so maybe my opinion doesn't matter all that much. So instead, let's get an opinion of someone who's been a fan of this character since before I was born. Say hi.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
So, Wonder Woman. How long have you been a fan of Wonder Woman?
Well, I was born in, well, I'd rather not say when, but I don't know, since I could read, and I could read it too. So, a long time, probably 50 years.
And before this movie, did you ever think they would be able to pull off a live-action version of the character?
Oh gosh, no. I mean, no way. I have to admit, I was surprised, shocked, pleased, happy, all kinds of different emotions about this movie because they represented her very, very well. She is iconic, and to actually do her justice is an amazing thing. So I was stunned.
What did you think of the writing in the movie and the visuals?
The visuals were amazing. That scene where she went across the field and she took charge and she was heroic was one of the best moments of movie history as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it doesn't matter if she's female or male, if she was a dog or a leopard, it doesn't really matter. She showed what she could do. The writing was good. I wouldn't have changed anything. I thought it was fantastic.
What about the computer-generated effects specifically?
I'm not as good of a judge of those as most people because I go into a movie wanting to just enjoy it and enjoy the story. I think there was room for improvement. There were places where I would have done things a little bit differently, or had I had the power to figure it out, I would have, but I still think they were great. I wouldn't have changed anything because I wouldn't have known what to change, but I think there was room for improvement, but there's always room for improvement. Every movie you could do could be a little bit better.
What did you think of Gal Gadot specifically?
My biggest problem with the whole Wonder Woman movie for years has been whether or not they could find somebody that could really be Wonder Woman. And in my mind, she's tall, she's shapely, she's beautiful, she's, I don't know, unique. And so when I first saw Gal, I wasn't sure she could be that person. She wasn't quite tall enough from a physical standpoint, but she more than made that up with her acting. I think she brought to the character the balance between being naive and being sure of herself, being beautiful yet modest. She was an Amazonian. She wasn't a human trying to be an Amazon. She wasn't a person trying to be Wonder Woman. She was Wonder Woman. And she is fantastic. And I can't wait for the interplay with her and the other members of the Justice League because she's such a pivotal character. And I think they got it right.
And just out of curiosity, what about this whole thing that James Cameron's been saying about the movie? That it's a step backwards for women's representation.
Oh my gosh, come on, people. She was fantastic. The cast was fantastic. Her interplay in Batman vs. Superman was fantastic. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it was kind of the best part of that movie.
It was the best part of that movie. I mean, my gosh, she saved Superman and Batman's freaking lives. It could have been other characters from Justice League, but it was her. She's the missing link that they've needed for years in the DC universe, but she's also a superhero. It doesn't matter if she's a woman or not. Now, granted, I'm pretty tickled that she is, because she's been my favorite for my entire life. James Cameron just needs to go back and make movies on boats. He'll be fine, and just leave the rest of it out of it. He can't even comment on this. He made a great movie about a boat. This is a superhero movie. Now, if some of the directors of the Avengers were commenting on this, I might listen to what they had to say.
Yes, that was my mom. She's been a Wonder Woman fan since she was literally a child. As she said herself, she never expected that a live-action movie adaptation would be possible. And as you just saw, this movie changed her mind. The Blu-ray release is great. The bonus features are all a lot of fun. They're not all that atypical for Blu-ray bonus features these days, but you can just tell. You can tell how much the majority of the people working on this movie cared about this character and doing her justice. They wanted to create a version of this character that fans of the character and new fans alike would resonate with, and they succeeded. At this point, with the DVD and the Blu-ray out, I see no reason why someone who is interested in this character, in superheroes, in war movies, in action, in general, shouldn't pick it up and give it a look. It's not a perfect movie. I give it between a 7 and an 8. The out-of-place bookends and the deficiencies in the special effects do dock it a couple of points. But it is, by far, the best DCEU movie up to this point, and has given me new hope that future DCEU movies might follow in its tracks and be significantly better than what we've seen in the past. The sequel to this movie has already been confirmed, and Patty Jenkins has been hired on again to direct. And I could not be more excited. But as per usual, guys, I'd like to know, what did you think of this movie? If you have seen it, let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. Either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.